This is WRUU-LP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul. You are listening to One Human Nation with your host, Sandy Batiste. This program will be talking about race and race relations in your community and nationally. Our goal is to be open, honest, and productive.
Welcome to the One Human Nation show. I'm your host, Sandy Batiste. Thanks for tuning in. And our show is about you having a safe, honest, open, and productive environment so that we can share our stories about race in the United States. Just a couple of pointers before we get started with today's show. The viewpoints expressed in the following program are not necessarily those of WRUU, its license holder, or its staff. So for today's show, we are going to have a guest. For those of you that are tuning in for the first time, we always try to have a guest call into the show, and it's not a gotcha moment. It's typically someone that I've already talked to ahead of time, and they feel comfortable with sharing their story. And remember, sharing your stories about race can be a very touchy subject. It could be very painful, and it can create tension in what you are listening to. So one of the guidelines that I like to share, and this is from the One Human Race initiative that I still participate in, that I really found to be beneficial in Austin, Texas. And one of the guiding principles that we use is that you may have an emotional reaction to something you view, hear, or experience. Be aware of your reactions and responses. Take care of yourself. Try to stay engaged. And this is the part that I absolutely love. The divine can be found in the tension. So this is not a show about judgment. That's why I talk to the guests that come on the show prior to, so they know that I'm not going to be judging what they say. That's why it's not a free-for-all call-in show where we just open up the lines and everybody can just call in and give their opinion on what the guest may be sharing. You're more than welcome to share your story, and we encourage people to do that by sending me an email to mystory@onehumannation.info. Send me an email and we can connect. And you can decide if this is something you want to do to share your story so that we can all learn about race, share what makes us different, but really what are some of the common denominators. And the whole point of it is so we can move forward through a process of reconciliation, of healing, moving towards justice. And it's the reconciliation part that I think we're stuck on as a nation. And if that gets to be too big for you to think in terms of nationally, what needs to happen in the United States, bring it in closer to home. Take a look at your family. Take a look at your neighborhood. Take a look at your community and start your journey from wherever it feels comfortable for you, at least as much comfort as you can get on a topic that really has to start with learning about our history. And when I say our history, it is the history of the United States of America. It's not a Black history or a white history or a Native American history, Asian American history. It is our history, and it's part of our story. So you will notice a common denominator when people call in to the show. I always try to encourage them to start from, their earliest experiences, if any, and give us an idea of where they grew up, what was the environment in their family, what were the conversations. So this may give you some insight if you're thinking about sharing your story. It can be a little invasive, especially if it's something that you really haven't thought about. And if it's something that's a sensitive topic in your family, then it's definitely something I encourage you before you share on the air of really starting doing some reconciliation within your own family, if that's possible. I realize that may not be possible based on wherever you are in your journey and where your family is in their journey. So as a refresh, some of the concepts that we talk about, you can look at the website onehumannation.info to get additional insight, because we talk a lot about the cultural iceberg, what we see on the external, on the outside. And those are things like the food, flags, language, dress, music, some different things externally. When you picture an iceberg and what's above the surface, what are some of those external things that we see? But even more important, how do we start looking at what's beneath the surface? What's really driving that iceberg? And that internal culture, the deep culture. There is a graphic that's posted at onehumannation.info that I encourage you to take a look at. And while you're there, also take a look at some of the video clips that are posted. A couple of them are from the series Race, the Power of an Illusion. There is a segment that talks about the difference between us. There's a little clip that's posted at onehumannation.info. The Story We Tell, there's another clip that's posted about our history. And then there is the one that's posted, The House I Live In. And I know I've mentioned before to take a look at these videos, because at some point I'm going to switch them out. I haven't done that yet, but at some point I will switch out the videos to keep everything fresh. So one of the concepts that we want to get down is the iceberg. And it's, if you want to read more about it, it's something that we use with the One Human Race series. It's from a book entitled The Wolf Shall Dwell with the Lamb by Eric Law. And again, that information is posted on the website at onehumannation.info. So I wanted to give us, just kind of a little reflection before our guest calls in and shares her story. And she's going to be talking a little bit about her heritage and that point that she was in a wake as an adult in realizing this thing called race, and what decisions it made for her because she did adopt, and what was that process about, and the advice she received from people, and how was she intentional about selecting a church in schools, and and how to go about that continuous process of engaging with people. And it's easier when you invite people to share their stories, and that's what we do with the One Human Nation show. It is an open invitation, but because we are very sensitive to the topic, we don't have it as a free-for-all call-in show. It is very much strategic, and making sure that the people that are coming on the show really are comfortable in what the questions are going to be, and they're at that place of they're ready to share their story. So I do appreciate those that are contacting me about sharing their story, and being sensitive about where you are in your journey. Hopefully I do that as the host on the show. Again, you can get information also from the Facebook page. So the website is www.onehumannation.info. And I've now switched things around on the website so you can visibly see archives as a page. And if you click on archives, you can listen to some of the previous shows. And I definitely encourage you to do that. We also have a Facebook page for One Human Nation. So please find us on Facebook, like our page. I'm going to be really honest. I haven't really started posting things on the Facebook page. My game plan, the plan, is to post a question based on the topic that we're going to be talking about on the show. So it will give you a way to respond if you're on Facebook. I know it may be frustrating with this particular format because you don't get the opportunity to actually call in unless you're a guest on the show, but you can email me. And again, that email address is mystory@onehumannation.info. Again, that's www.onehumannation.info. So one of the things I'm enjoying about being back in Savannah, and if you've been listening to the show or been to the website, you know I'm originally from Savannah. I was born and raised in Savannah. And being back after being absent for 30 years has been very interesting to see all of the changes. And for me, it's very positive. There was just not many of the cultural things that are now in existence in Savannah weren't here when I was when I graduated from college and moved out to Texas. They just weren't here. And moving back, it has really been exciting to go to different museums and start looking at the diversity that this city has to be a small city. And even as I sit here and talk to you on the show, I can see the tour bus going by, and it's like constant activity with people that are visiting Savannah. So I would highly encourage a visit to the city if you haven't done that. And if you already visited, you can always come back to see us. So as a reminder, if you want to share your story, we always talk about the I voice, using your I voice. So I'm going to try to share with you really quickly one of the implicit association tests. I did take another implicit association test. When we hear the phone ring, that means the guest is calling in. So I would be cutting the conversation short, going to break so you can listen to some awesome music from Joe Morales. And so just keep in mind when you hear the phone ring, that means that I'm going to break. But I do want to share with you, I've been taking the implicit association test. So I shared on the previous show the results from retaking the test that I had about race, specifically black and white, that I took recently compared to the results that I received like over a year ago. But I also wanted to take the one as it relates to skin color, which can be a very touchy subject in many of different ethnicities. It's still a subject that comes up as far as a preference to whether someone is lighter skin or darker skin. So there is actually an implicit association test that you can take related to if there is a preference for one or the other. And one of the things I do when I take the implicit association test, they will ask you a lot of other questions that are not related to the actual taking the test, and you can skip those. You don't have to answer those. So I typically never answer the questions about, age or what year I was born or any particular religious denomination. I mean, there's some other questions that they ask, and I'm sure it's a part of them collecting data to see if they see any trends. But I pretty much just stick with answering the questions and going through the test, and the key is they want you to go through it as quickly as possible so you're not overthinking, because it's just an assessment. There is no right or wrong. There is not any judgment. So I took the one as it related to if I had a preference for skin color, and I wasn't surprised of the results. And it's interesting how they phrase this. So I'm going to read it to you exactly the way it comes from the results. It says, your data suggests a slight automatic preference for dark-skinned people over light-skinned people. And so you will, if you take this particular one, and if you've taken any of the ones related to race, you'll know there's a little process they go to get to that effect. I think it is a large part for me based on how I grew up in my family environment. So my dad was darker skinned, and he, was the rock and security. And so it's not surprising to me. That's a slight automatic preference. Now my mom would be what you would describe as lighter skin. So, believe it or not, we had those conversations, not in a judgmental way in our house as far as a preference for lighter skin or darker skin, because it didn't matter. But I think that what we have a preference for, a lot of it is shaped based on our culture growing up. What were we exposed to? What do we feel comfortable with? So as we get ready for the guest that will be calling in, I do want to stress or invite you to, take a couple of minutes when you're not rushed to do anything. Go to onehumannation.info and click on the link that will take you to the implicit association test page. And you can just go in as a guest. You don't have to give your email address. You can just go in as a guest, and that way you don't have to worry about, okay, I don't want to give my email address. And as I get ready for the caller, we are going to take a short break, and we will be back with some more information from the One Human Nation show.
Hello?
Pam, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So we're with our guest, Pam, and she's calling in from Austin, Texas. So, Pam, thanks for joining the One Human Nation show. I appreciate you taking the time to call in. I know it's a little bit interesting since we have that 1 hour adjustment in time.
My pleasure.
So I just want to start with if you can kind of share with us, growing up, did you hear any stories about race? Was there any discussion, where you grew up, and kind of give us an idea of what part of the United States did you grow up in?
I grew up primarily in northern Arkansas, the top half of Arkansas. My formative years were in northeast Arkansas, which is a very white area of the United States. I didn't hear much of anything about people of different races, and I was pretty much only exposed to white Protestants growing up. My parents would tell me that everyone was created equal and would show me pictures and whatnot, but I never really interacted with anyone who wasn't white growing up. I will say the very first time, which I may have not thought of before, was when I was in fifth grade. There was one black boy in my fifth grade classroom who was treated quite differently from the white students in my classroom. He was the first black person that I had experienced with one-on-one, face-to-face. And I very much noticed that he didn't get treated the same way as everyone else. He was treated much more harshly with a different set of expectations. And that's when I sort of realized that there was something up. When I was in my 30s, go ahead. It felt to me as though he was expected to do something more than we were.
Okay.
And as though it was assumed also that he couldn't. And furthermore, when, for whatever reason, he would not reach those expectations, he was treated much more harshly than the rest of us, anyone else. More quickly sent to the principal's office, more quickly sent out into the hall, that sort of thing.
So about what year was this?
That was 1976.
Oh, okay.
No, 1975. 75, 76, right around in there.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And so I'm sorry to have interrupted you, but when you said a different set of expectations, I just kind of wanted to get a little clarification on that. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So back to when you got older, when you were older, about what age were you then, really taking a closer look at this whole thing called race?
When I was in my 30s was the point at which I sort of realized I was white, that whiteness was a thing, and that it mattered, that because of that I needed to hold myself to a different, I needed to understand that carried a set of expectations, that I couldn't just assume various things. A friend of mine and I were in a car, and I don't know what I said, but she said to me back, "Well, that's racist. She's Lebanese. She's of Lebanese origin. Her family's Lebanese American." And I was like, "Well, that's not racist," because at that point I sort of thought of racist as like my grandfather, who really was sort of the worst kind of racist in the 20s and 30s. And I just sort of thought if I wasn't that kind of racist, outright sort of saying terrible words and believing terrible things about people, that wasn't my bag. I didn't have to fall into that category. But she pointed out to me that in fact that I could be doing and saying racist things without recognizing that I was. And she pointed it out, and she said, and I was like defending myself, and she said what I'll never forget, which is, you don't get to decide. You don't get to decide what hurts my feelings, or you don't get to decide what
is actually
is racist. Right, because you're not the one who gets affected by it. You're not on the receiving end. So that was a little bit of a wake-up call for me that day.
Interesting. So that was in your 30s, and moving forward in your timeline, in your journey, because it is your journey and your story. What was the next experience as far as your decision making on what choices you were going to be making that were race related?
Well, I think the next, or the hugest decision ever in my whole life having to do with race was a point at which my ex and I decided to, at the time we were married, and we decided to adopt a child. And we were going through the process of filling out the paperwork, and we had a social worker, and she said, well, what race of child? And my ex and I had discussed it and decided we didn't have a preference. Any child would be okay because we had been wanting a child for a long time. And she said, well, if you put down that you're willing to adopt a black child, you will get a black child. And we were like, okay, that's fine. And she said, and what you need to understand about that is that once you adopt a black child, you become a black family. And at the time, I didn't really appreciate what that meant. I just thought that was a little absurd on its face because I was always going to be white. And furthermore, I'm already gay, so I have a certain amount of social attention to me that I stand out in public spaces in a way that straight people don't. They can afford to ignore the fact that they're straight, whereas I can't afford to ignore that, my sexual orientation.
Okay.
So I figured, it's going to be the same thing as that. I didn't think it was going to be that big of a deal. So that was the next time that someone said something to me that sort of gave me pause and made me think about it.
Interesting. So you did adopt a black child, and what was that experience like as part of your journey?
Well, I will have to tell you that, first of all, her entrance into my life is just the greatest moment ever, the most joyful thing that has ever happened to me, and I would never, ever trade that for anything. I do know that when I was a full-time parent, when she was an infant and little, and I was the one responsible for taking her out around and doing the things, and I had a number of experiences, especially with black women who were very interested in my ability to care for her, especially her hair.
Right.
And we're very happy.
We do have a thing about the hair. We want to make sure that that's all. Yeah. So if it's not looking right, Pam, we will, there's going to be some typically black female that's going to have a conversation with you.
They were having preemptive conversations with me, and I tell you what, could not have been more grateful because I didn't know the first thing about black hair, and my daughter has very curly hair, thick and curly hair. And oddly, the funniest thing about the whole situation was all the conflicting advice I got. Everybody has a different opinion about what the correct thing to do. And of course, I had no point of reference with my own hair. And I had a couple of people make comments about the fact that we didn't match. I had a little white boy in a grocery store point out that, and his parent was really embarrassed. And I said, no, I mean, we don't match. So that's an understandable question. And, we had our stock answer for that about how she grew in another lady's tummy, not mine. And that lady and her did match, the lady whose tummy she grew in. And so, and black women too want to be clear about, where I got the baby, whose baby it was.
That you didn't steal someone's baby? Is that what they were?
Yeah, just to make sure I knew that, people are going to have an eye on me. And I think that may be part of what the social worker meant, that black families will care about my family, and white people care about us in a different way as well, and not always in a positive light. So there's that.
As part of that, then, because I know I met you through the church experience, I'm assuming that part of your journey was then being intentional about church, about school.
Oh,
So,
yes. Oh, I mean, first of all, when we decided to adopt and we knew we were going to adopt a black baby, I immediately found a black church. And I had to find a black church that was also inclusive for gay people.
okay.
So that's how I found the church that we go to now. It was super, super important to me that I raise her in a black church because I understand from the black community that's a huge part of black culture in America is the black church.
Okay.
Also, I just didn't feel confident that I could raise her by myself to be, a deeply spiritual person.
You needed a village, right?
I did need a village. And also, we really, really, when she came home to live with us, we lived in a neighborhood. I think she single-handedly integrated that neighborhood when she moved into our house as an infant, and she would have been one of a handful of black kids at the neighborhood school. So we bought a house in East Austin at the time. Our street was, the ratio of blacks and whites on the street tipped more towards black people. Now, because of people have been selling those houses and the property taxes have been rising, our neighborhood has shifted more white.
Okay.
But we do live still in East Austin, and I do try my best to take her when I go to stores that are where I'm the minority, not her.
Okay.
And luckily, our regular H-E-B is fairly, our regular grocery store is fairly mixed in terms of race and ethnicities.
Okay.
Shopping. And, our neighborhood is still better than some, but at least it was better than our old one. It's still not as great as it could have been, and it was very hard to pick. When it was time for her to go to school, we picked her preschool based on where we could find black teachers to teach her, and where her classmates would be mostly children who were black. When it came time to put her in elementary school, we very much struggled in Austin. It's very segregated by race in the schools. There were only 2 schools in Austin that had high test scores, which were important to us, and were also mixed race in terms of the makeup of population of the elementary school. Yeah. So we sent her, that's the house we bought. It was in that neighborhood, and she went there for 4 years to that school.
Okay. So how did your, in this kind of, because we always try to use, from the One Human Race experience, we always try to use our I voice, because you're telling your story. But I think in this case, it would be okay to share. I mean, how does your daughter view herself? I mean, do you feel like she's aware of who she is does she identify as a black person, or what is her awareness level?
Well, let me start out by saying that when she was a baby, a group of women at church formed a support group for parents who had adopted across race.
Oh, okay.
And that was one of the biggest blessings of my whole life in terms of raising my daughter, because we were able to ask the questions that are embarrassing and difficult,
right,
and maybe not entirely politically correct,
right,
and get honest answers and patience and honesty, frankness back,
right.
And so I learned a lot. And one of the questions I asked them was, I was feeling like my daughter was going to grow up and not feel at home in either place, not feel at home in the white culture and not feel at home in the black culture. Now she really does understand. She's always noticed that we don't match. We've always talked about race. She's never not been interested in thinking about that.
Okay.
And she has a conflicted sense about herself, I believe, right now. She does I don't know if your listening audience is familiar with the term code switching, but there is a set of behaviors Evie will adopt if she's in a group of black folks where she's not in a minority, where she's in the majority with her peers or adults who are black, that she will adopt that white people would identify as sort of black, I don't know, sort of black way of being black in the world.
And that's something we have talked about on the show as part of internal culture. And it's in the roles of how we even communicate, in the language, in body language, as well as conversational patterns in different social situations. That is something that we that I've shared with the listeners, and it's posted at the onehumannation.info website. So I don't think it's something that's just special to her. I think
not at all. I think in answer to your question, that she does recognize that she exists in two cultures.
Okay.
She recognizes what is white and she recognizes what is black. She's also had the unfortunate, I guess honestly, any black person who's grown up in the United States since its inception recognizes that they're living in a dangerous world, that this is not a safe place. This United States is not a safe place to be black. And Evie recognizes that. In her case, it's because she's been watching the news over the last, handful of years about police officers killing black folks for, really honestly no reason. And not getting in trouble for it.
Right.
So she recognizes that her spaces have relative safety to them.
Right.
Her church, her home may be safe spaces, but that when she enters the world, and even to a certain degree when she's at school, she can't count on not getting hurt.
Right. So how old is your daughter now, Pam?
13.
13. So, wow, that is a very, and I think that's the struggle for a lot of black parents because, they have the talk, just like you obviously had the talk with her and with her being raised in the environment that I know, that church environment, since I was a member of the same church, even though I did not realize that they did have that support group in place because I was a relatively new participant in the St. James church family, which is pretty awesome. But it is pretty sad that she's aware, like many other black children are aware, that it is not safe, but it also, I think, creates a certain strength of character for her to be that aware. So, it's to me, you've done a wonderful job in making sure that she's prepared for that.
It's interesting, Sandy, because this year in her school, in a poetry section they did in her language arts, she wrote a lot of poems and addressing her thoughts about this very issue. And so she has a lot of language that she can use to think of and talk about it with people. And I think you're right in that she's not afraid to do it.
Right.
This is not a subject that we tiptoe around, or we've ever done that.
Right.
And I feel like it would have been a disservice to her to do that. I feel like as a white parent, just standing next to me, she's protected in a particular way. Even when we've driven through parts of the United States that I didn't feel safe.
Right.
Anyway, and
right.
I could definitely tell from the looks that we would get in our very mixed race family that we were not welcome in these places. As long as we got out of there, nobody said anything.
Right. So,
and I feel confident that would not have been the case had she been standing next to black adults. But when she gets out in the world, people are going to assume she was raised by a black family. Okay. And so I feel like it's only fair for her to get out there with a certain amount of savvy and knowledge, or she's going to be
Demolished.
vulnerable.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Can you
Right.
hold that thought, Pam? I'm going to do a little break so we can make some announcements here. For the time kind of got away from me, so I was fascinated with the whole conversation. So hold on the line. I'm going to be back with you in 1 minute. We're going to take a break so we can hear from one of our corporate sponsors. Hold on.
Okay.
This portion of WRUU-LP Savannah Soundings programming is made possible by a grant from Sentient Bean, offering fair trade coffee, vegan and vegetarian food, and breakfast all day. Located at 13 East Park Avenue, across the street from the tennis courts at Forsyth Park. Our menu and special events listings can be found at sentientbean.com.
As a business, if you enjoy our programming on WRUU-LP, please support the station with a donation. Let your customers, neighbors, and friends know that you share our vision of building a thriving community based on diverse, vibrant radio programming. As a business partner, our listeners will know you support Savannah's only broad-based community radio station. Become a tower sponsor or underwriter. To check out the levels of corporate sponsorship and to donate, go to www.wruu.org/corporate. Again, to check out the levels of corporate sponsorship and to donate, go to www.wruu.org/corporate. Thank you for listening to and supporting WRUU-LP. You're listening to WRUU-LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul. Okay, Pam, are you still there?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I hated to break there, but I was looking at the time and I was like, oh, I've got to get this in to make sure we get our corporate sponsors taken care of. But so I do think it's she's 13 and prepared, because that is kind of the age that she's going to be doing more and more things without you being there, and just being aware of what the impact can be, I think is pretty critical. Hold on 1 second here. Just want to make sure that everything is being everything is being out there for our listeners. So anyway, any other thoughts you want to share on that and her being prepared for the world that she's going to be facing?
I don't think so. I think that pretty much she'll still have to think about what it means to not be white, and I suspect that a lot of black kids do, regardless of where they grow, what family they grow up in. Since
right.
White is the dominant culture. It's almost invisible. I think it's invisible to white people but there is a definite set of values and expectations associated with being white that that she'll have to negotiate to the degree to which she wants to participate in that or not, and make that important to her. Right. And I think she'll be in good shape, in part because not just because of us, but because we've had really outstanding allies in raising her at both the church and in our family's life, friends of the family, people she knows, teachers, coaches, have all, contributed to her understanding about who she is in the world. I certainly cannot, by any means, take credit for that.
Take full responsibility? Well,
uh-uh.
I think most parents appreciate when they have an extended family that helps them, because it is a lot. And I commend you on, doing such an exceptional, part of parenting and being open and awake. I mean, it wasn't that you weren't aware, which would have been just devastating. for her to, be in that place, but it was that you were aware and what we call being awake. And that you were in a place that you could get the support that's needed. And so, again, thank you for sharing your story. Any other comments that you would like to share with the listeners?
I think the only thing I have left to say is that I think it's super important for me to recognize that I can't ever know everything, that I'm never finished understanding what it means for me to be white and for my child to not be.
Right.
And that I can't ever feel like I've arrived at a place and I don't have anything left to learn. That's the main thing, is that I still have room for people to teach me what I don't even know that I don't know yet. And, for that I'm really grateful, people around me, and I just have to remember, that's the advice I would give to your listeners, is to recognize that. Yeah.
I think that is great advice, because we do, we say it, it is a journey, and everybody's journey is going to be a little bit different, but it's about being open to the experience, no matter how uncomfortable it can be. And no one really likes to put themselves in an uncomfortable situation. But when you have to do it, you want to have the skill sets to do it. And that's one reason why we do the One Human Race series. That's one reason why we encourage people to just learn as much as possible about other cultures, learn about our real history as a country, with all of its ugliness, and just to be aware so we can move through the process of reconciliation to get to healing, to get to justice. So Pam, thanks again for calling in and sharing your story. It's very much appreciated. I'll let you go so you can get back to your evening, but thank you so much again for calling in to the One Human Nation show.
It's been my pleasure, my honor, and thank you so much for all that you're doing.
Thank you. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back with some concluding thoughts from the One Human Nation show. So we're back with the One Human Nation show. As we wrap up this evening, I do want to encourage you to listen to next week's show on Thursdays. We're on from Thursdays from 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Eastern Standard Time. And I do encourage you I invite you, I should say, to take one of the implicit association tests that's posted at the onehumanation.info website. If you would like to participate in the show, you can send me an email at my story at onehumanation.info. Again, that address to send me an email is mystory at onehumanation.info. And as we finish up today's show, keep in mind that the viewpoints expressed in the preceding program were not necessarily those of WRUU, its license holder, or its staff. Again, thanks for listening to the One Human Nation show. Coming up next is going to be Troy Stoner with Sound Limit. So I'm going to leave you with the musical genius of Joe Morales. And thanks for tuning in. And we look forward to talking to you via email or on our webpage at One Human Nation. Let's connect soon. Thanks for listening.